2023 has been wild. Truly some of the greatest titles we've ever gotten in gaming have come out this year. However, with so many great titles that everyone already knew about, the smaller ones had an even harder time shining. So here's a list of 10 of them that I feel didn't get their due. And before we get into it, I'd like to state at least my favorite games you probably did play, those being Remnant 2, Bleak Faith Forsaken, Baldur's Gate 3, Risk Your Reign Returns, and RoboQuest. Anyway, without further ado, the 10 games of 2023 you didn't play, but probably should. Arcadegeddon. Arcadegeddon is a third-person shooter roguelite set in a cartoonishly cyberpunk world. Your uncle runs a neat little arcade which hosts a slew of characters that are all part of different gangs that resist the man in their own way. The game absolutely oozes style throughout the entire experience as you enter cyberspace to wage war against the corpo takeover. You've got a sizable variety of weapons, abilities, and perks to choose from, and an absolute trove of cosmetics, so it's absolutely easy to make your character really feel like your own. As for gameplay, this game is buttery smooth to control, and the gunplay is ever satisfying as each gun feels like it has a solid punch to it. Apparently this game was in early access on Epic, but released to seemingly little to no fanfare on Steam at full launch, which is honestly a damn shame. BeatBeat. BeatBeat is a neat little rhythm platformer. It's well crafted and has a really nice little aesthetic of being part of like an old OS, complete with its own little adorable AI companion. She'll interact with you, get to know you, and all that good stuff. More importantly, or less depending how lonely you are, the game itself plays quite well. There's a decent selection of bass songs with well-made stages to accompany them, where you're jumping and interacting with the circles to the beat. The devs behind this also clearly took into account all levels of play because the difficulty and accessibility options are quite extensive for such a little package, from having the game pretty much just play itself to making sure you are the only one to blame for any failure. It also includes a fully featured level creation suite with the ability to use other music as well as workshop support. If you're looking for a new rhythm game you can really sink some time into mastering or making, BeatBeat is really worth the look. Midnight Heist. It's no secret I like co-op horror titles. I've had plenty of fun with games like Phasmophobia and Remnant Records, but also the co-op burglary horror known as Boomin. This leans more toward the latter type, as a somewhat more advanced form of it. You and your team of equally odd-looking individuals take off from your mother's basement to go and hack data from corporations, and even find some incriminating evidence to blackmail them with. Why there's always vodka and OJ paired with the cocaine is something I might just be too straight-edge to understand. Oh, and while you're going around playing Hackermans, playing minigames to steal data, a ghost will try to hunt you down and kill you. At present, the game only has 3 entities and 3 maps, with each entity thankfully being different enough that you'll have to change up your strategies a bit, but the base elements of the game are definitely something that shows a massive amount of potential should these devs continue to work on it, which at least they do seem to be. Planet S. I have a soft spot for a good RTS now and again. While I started on the N64, Age of Empires was early on in my introduction into PC gaming. Planet S isn't Age of Empires, but it is still a top-notch RTS, feeling in many ways like a smaller-scale version of Sins of a Solar Empire with some planet-side colony management mixed in quite well. This game satisfies an easy niche for an RTS that can be played as casually or as hardcore as you want. Up to 4 players, or bots, are able to play in a solar system with a relatively balanced number of planets and of various types. Never start on a desert or snow planet, trust me. Plenty of competent systems lie within, with plenty of depth to keep you thinking of your next move, whether the next move is expanding or improving your colony or furthering your conquest. There's a lot to love so far, and the dev seems to improve it with each update. Spellmasons. Roguelikes and lights are a dime a dozen these days, so it's hard to make them really feel like they stand out. Thankfully, this one did, at least for my friends and me. Spellmasons is a 6-player roguelike, yes, a proper roguelike, so permadeath and 0 meta progression, where each stage feels like an isolated fight from a turn-based CRPG. You have allotted movement and mana to work with each turn, and the spell system is quite varied, which contributes to its main gimmick of spell combos. We're not talking combos like you get with something like Magicka, but instead chaining spells together to compound their effects. As long as you have mana to cast it, you're only limited really by your own creativity. Want to just send a massive hail of arrows? Several multi-targeting spells and a stack of arrow spells has you covered. Want to turn an enemy into a living bomb, send them into a crowd of allies, then detonate them? Bloat, push, and kill them in any manner of your choice. It's also continuing to receive updates with a developer who definitely listens. Easy recommendation. Destructure AD. There is a certain genre I like to call 2000s aesthetic. It's hard to properly quantify, but games like Wick and the Fable of Souls, or that one game with the ship that you swing around like a flail, the name always escapes me on that one, and subsequently Destructure AD all fit into it. This game is essentially an air hockey roguelite with a Mad Max kind of wasteland flair. You'll be annihilating fortifications by smacking balls around, firing bolts and blasts, among other things, and upgrading your machine between stages. The levels will absolutely increase in difficulty over time, adding in various types of turrets, more blocks to further slow you down, and just overall upping the action ante. The gameplay loop is arcadey and addictive, and the visuals and sound design release the happy chemicals when you blow shit up. What more do you really need? PictoPull. The 3DS was an incredible system. I played mine more than the Wii U and Switch combined, personally. It also gave us a ton of great indie and indie-adjacent efforts where Nintendo decided to get a little more experimental with their smaller divisions, such as the original game Pushmo, or Push Blocks, for those of you across the pond. It spawned a series of picture puzzle games where you'd push or pull blocks to maneuver around until everything was in just the right place for you to ascend to the goal. Of course, Nintendo would never publish something to PC, their loss really. Thankfully in this case, we don't need them to. In comes PictoPull. To say it took inspiration from the aforementioned 3DS title might be a bit of an understatement, but especially given the lack of games on the market that fill this void, that's honestly far from an insult. It's a solid translation of the idea and even features a full level creator. Absolutely worth a look. Nienix, or Nienix, I genuinely don't know. In space, no one can hear you loot. Except, of course, your friends. Should you play this open-world shmup ARPG in co-op. A decent-length campaign will take you through the vast reaches of space, leveling up skill trees, getting new ships and weapons, and slaughtering countless enemies, exploding into good, old-fashioned loot. There's plenty of build variety within, allowing from anything from a guns-blazing approach to being a space worm lord. I'm rather fond of turrets and healing fields with poison weapons myself. It's a hybrid of genres that's surprisingly untapped, but with a developer that updated the game multiple times a week during its early access period, a lot of love really went into this project. It's honestly a great game for both casual and hardcore players alike, and it doesn't hurt that it has the kind of sprite work I find myself rather fond of, much like one of the previous entries, Destructure AD. On Dark Terms. Here's one I actually covered in a previous video. It's once again no secret to those who are familiar with me, which apparently there are, neat, that I am rather fond of ghost hunting games, especially when they have a unique little twist to them. Remnant Records is one such example, On Dark Terms is another. Set in the apocalypse, you and your friends are humans aided by Aloha, a voodoo spirit. You're granted tools and abilities to help combat this hellscape, and doing so involves wandering an open world, finding dungeons, which are the game's ghost hunts, and banishing evil. Finding different evidence types and clearing corruption while you fight off sanity-eating demons is a decently fun prospect, if you ask me. There are a lot of systems going on at once in this game, so it's probably not for people new to the ghost hunting genre, but considering you can transform into a cat and run around a magical apocalypse, maybe that's enough for some people too. Kowloon's Curse, Lost Report. I'd like to open with the fact that this game has the single coolest title screen I have ever seen, and leave it at that. Okay, I won't leave it at that, but what I said is still true. Oh, and this is the game's intro. Well, at least part of it. It's kind of long, so here's a section of it. Those vibes you get persist throughout this entire experience too. You're a simple man of simple means in what feels like a surrealist cyberpunk purgatory, all wrapped up in a lovely little DRPG style. Hell, this game is technically just a demo, or a prologue to an upcoming project. At that, it's free. And at that, it's one of the best possible free games you could download on Steam. Turn-based, ridiculous combat where you can do things like give people existential dread, give them exploding cigarettes, and hack their phones to text their coworkers to make them cry will keep combat entertaining, while the world itself is ever engrossing. I mean, look at this cat. Just look at this badass cat. The story you get is also an interesting one. The further it progresses, the more it absolutely compels you to keep playing. I mean, for one, it's the only game where you can help aliens get home with the aid of a telepathic dolphin in a pocket dimension. And for two, it can surprisingly tug on your heartstrings a bit and ask some existential questions. I simply cannot recommend this game enough. Bonus game: Hypersomnia. This game is an entirely last-minute addition to the script, but it's also an entirely last-minute addition to 2023, so yeah. To preface, I spent a solid amount of time playing Stick Arena back on X-Gen, that old 2D top-down PvP flash game. It was insanely fun, chaotic action, fun maps, great weapon variety, and while there have been a number of games over the years that have brought additional 2D action in a PvP setting, with games like Counter-Strike 2D and even side-scrolling hardcore shooters like Brainout, none ever quite held the exact level of fun that I was looking for. In comes Hypersomnia, what I consider to be the peak of top-down 2D action so far. This game features a lot of mechanical depth and little details into a high-octane PvP situation, whether the intensity of a 1v1 or the ever more fast-paced action of increasing the players beyond that. This game hits with lovely visuals and meaty sound design, and frankly has a very high skill ceiling. Whether you're dual-wielding snipers, or throwing knives or grenades while reloading, or even throwing your weapon down to defuse a bomb faster. It's also free, so yeah, just go play it. Honorable mention: Cave Crawlers. While I'd love to formally include this free-to-play co-op roguelite, it's over 1,000 reviews and doesn't really qualify for my arbitrary qualifications. But I'm here talking about it anyway. It's a great time overall, with skill trees to apply to virtually any playstyle. I prefer the damage over time and support abilities of the torches myself. Anyway, you should absolutely go play it. Games I'm most looking forward to that you should also check out: Witherholm, a co-op horror title featuring you and your friends as little goblin mages, navigating dungeons to complete various objectives and puzzles. This game oozes atmosphere without feeling forced, resulting in a rather engrossing package. Echo Point Nova, a co-op shooter with some of the most satisfying movement systems I've ever experienced in a shooter. Plenty of secrets in the demo alone, getting you more weapons, abilities, and hats. The shooting also feels just as good as the movement. Extremely slick. Freejack Online. This one's actually a relaunch of a parkour racing game from yesteryear with a Jet Set-esque anime aesthetic, a solid soundtrack, and hugely rewarding gameplay for those willing to get good. In conclusion, 2023 was all in all one of the single greatest years in gaming history. I wish I could say the same for the so many developers laid off across the board, unfortunately. So many great titles, though, hit the market that it was nearly impossible to get to them all, especially as far as my wallet's concerned. We did have some major stinkers, of course, from both larger third parties and, unsurprisingly, AAA studios, but we definitely, and thankfully, had far more good than bad. Hopefully I've convinced you to at least give one of these games a shot, though, because the indie scene is, as always, absolutely where it's at. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. This has been Freak Show's Take.